see if I can crack through some of these questions. And if you guys have any questions, make sure you put them in that comment bar. Just go ahead and ask them there. I know there's only like a few of you on this one, and then I have the other people from the fear course and stuff. You guys are seeing a different version here, so I'll try and answer. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between both of your guys' questions here, so and as well as questions that people have asked me prior. So I got a few things, but like I said, make sure you ask me on here, and I'll try and touch everything. I'll try and get into all of it. So first question that I got here, and this was asked from someone, and it was kind of your classic. I mean, I've heard this. Everyone here has heard this question a while. Is like, how do you get out of the friend zone, right? So this is one that this is like your classic question, right? So first things first, how to get out of the friend zone. So this is asked by a guy, which is kind of typically the experience I find, right? Is that like a lot of guys will ask this particular question is like, how do I get out of the friend zone? So there's two things. First thing you need to understand is that girls aren't putting you there, you're putting yourself there. And that's done with your actions, right? And so realistically, a lot of guys think girls are placing them in this friend zone sort of thing. When the reality of the fact is that it's really like you've behaved like a friend. You've really demonstrated friendly behavior. And so that's giving the girl a kind of a, let's say, something to go off of, right? Because you got to remember, there's such a coyness with dating nowadays. It's really odd. There's kind of this sort of like, I don't know what this is. I don't know, what does this mean? Are we hanging out? Is this going to be a thing? Like, most people are kind of at that will of this like randomness, where they're like, well, they don't really know what's going on. They're like, I'm talking to this person. I don't know if they're my friend or if this is like a romance thing. I think the major issue with a lot of guys is that they play it safe and they go into this like friend mode, and in hopes that like, okay, well, if I can kind of be a friend at first and then I'll kind of gradually become like a romantic interest. Unfortunately, that's not exactly how it works. Attraction for, males and females is typically a bit different, right? You can kind of tell that. Like, most guys are, they're more visually based, whereas like women are more cognitively based, broad strokes speaking. But I would go ahead and say that when we look at, how to get out of the friend zone, most of this thing, like say you're already in it, so it's like right from the get-go sort of thing, you're going to have to understand that if this is new, if this is something that you're just starting out, it's going to be a little trickier. You're going to probably lose the friendship. That's just where it's at. Because for most people, for guys and girls, it's very different. The equivalent would be very much like, say, how can I best explain this? It's that, imagine you were seeing a girl you were very attracted to. You started chatting it up with her, and you're like, man, like this girl's beautiful, whatnot like that. And from that place, it's like like you've been hanging out with her for a bit, and then all of a sudden, like, she turns around and like completely visibly different. Like, looks haggard. She's like aged like 20 years, and you're like, whoa, what the fuck, right? That's kind of what it feels like for a lot of girls. So like, they'll be friends with guys, and then out of nowhere, the guy's gonna be like, oh, hey, I have feelings for you, da-da-da. And she's like, whoa, what the fuck? I thought we were just friends. And so that same kind of jolt back of like, what the hell is this? That's what a lot of people are experiencing. And so when I look at like how to actually get out of the friend zone, it's one of those things like, don't put yourself in there to begin with. Be very clear in your intent. So moving forward with that, I would say that like, you need to be very clear in your intent. Be okay, and it's not about, you have to have like social awareness with this, but be very like upfront with your intentions. And you do this with flirting off the bat. You don't come in with a friend zone, you're like with a friend kind of behavior. You come in with a direct, like a man to woman frame, right? Where you're like, oh yeah, no, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm looking for. Like, I have no interest in, being your friend sort of thing. Like, I think you're attractive, right? You're being very direct. And the biggest problem that people find with that typically is obviously you are at risk of being rejected. But really think about it like this, is that if you were going to get rejected anyways, it's like, put that responsibility on yourself. Don't put it on the girl later. Take that responsibility up front and just be very clear in your intent. I think this is a huge thing that like a lot of people like struggle with, because they're kind of trying to like wean their way into it. Whereas like realistically speaking, it comes off creepy later, because you're demonstrating one thing and hoping that like, if I do enough good behavior, if I'm friendly enough, if I'm nice enough, then I can trade those points for sex or a relationship later. When in reality, it's not what most people experience. The girls usually freak out and they're like, what the hell is this? I thought we were friends. And then immediately that trust is lost. So that's my advice on how to get out of the friend zone, or sorry, don't put yourself in. But yeah, like I said, to get out, you got to recognize that like it could mean the end of the friendship, if you will. But I would argue that, you know, if you really had feelings from the get-go, like if it was the kind of thing you were immediately attracted to her, are you really her friend or are you her fan? And that's something to really ask yourself, right? Like, are you treating her the same way you would treat your closest guy friends, right? Or are you just like a little bit nicer? Or are you like kind of just sort of like controlling the stuff you say to her and filtering your information? Are you doing that sort of thing? And this is really important because if you recognize that you're doing that, if you recognize that you're not treating her like an equal, you're not treating her like your friend, you're treating her like someone you're trying to please, you're treating her like someone that you're trying to impress. You don't really do that with your friends, right? With your friends, you're just being yourself. And so this is very, very key, is to understand that like maybe, you know, it seems like a friendship, but is it more that you're a fan? And so really acknowledge this thing. And then from that point, yeah, like I said, moving forward, I mean, if you were to try and get out, you could start to like suggest certain things, and you don't do some big dramatic thing where you're like, hey, listen, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I really think that you and me would be together, and we'd be great together if you could just see it. What's up, Simon? See, you just walked in here. So then immediately it's one of those things where, you know, don't make the big ordeal of it, because that alone, that's not going to go anywhere. That's almost never panned out. There are cases where you have like the girl also feels that, but she'll be giving you signals as well. And so essentially see it as like you want to start leaning into that like real flirtatious kind of frame, right? Where maybe you're holding eye contact for like a tad longer. Maybe you're like more physical, like, you know, as you're like very touchy, stuff like this. And then you can kind of like lean into that and let that naturally progress. And it's kind of a back and forth where you're really feeling the vibe someone's giving you. There's a massive difference. And so recognize that difference. But rule of thumb, don't put yourself there. Don't act like a friend. Be okay with coming at this like man to woman frame where you're okay with the fact that like she might not be interested. And that's totally cool. It's just like get that out of the way. Don't invest in like this weird friendship sort of thing and then end up getting hurt. So that's what I would suggest in terms of like how to get out of the friend zone and such. Let's see here. And again, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to post them too. Another question I have here. I got one from Jeremy. What's up, bro? Your situation. Just wondering if there are any general rules on how do you suggest getting over a breakup when you can't stop thinking about the person you once loved and you had a deep connection with. Okay. So understand this is that if you got out of a breakup, immediately you have to remember like what was the relationship doing for you. First off, you were getting some validation, right? Like you have another person that likes you and whatnot like that. You were also getting affection, companionship, sex, love, all these different things. And realistically what that is it's, you know, it's the chemicals going off in your brain, right? You're getting like serotonin, dopamine, these sort of things. And when that relationship ends, bam, it's gone instantly, right? And so you have to recognize that there's going to be a withdrawal period. But when I look at this sort of thing, like how do you actually get over someone and you can't stop thinking about them, realistically ask yourself this question. Who is the movie star to your life? The life that is yours, who's the movie star in it? Why are you making it the other person? You should be the star of your own movie. And you should be welcoming cool co-stars. But when your focus is then placed on them, when your focus is very much like, you know, what's going on with them? Do they still like me? Does this? You're making them the movie star of your own life. And so that's the first thing I would say. But immediately from there, if you're like, let's go back into your question here. It's general rules for how do you suggest getting over a breakup. Me personally, this is how I'd immediately do it. So I already understand that I'm going to have synapses that are going to trigger and fire off every time I see something that reminds me of the person, right? So it could be something like certain songs. It could be things like, you know, I see pictures of us together. It could be things like little mementos and stuff we got or gifts and things like that. Rule number one is I immediately get rid of all the triggers, everything. I spend a day and I actually go and write like full out, like, why did we break up? Say if I broke up with a person, I go and say, like, these were the reasons I broke up with this person. This. And I do that right when it was fresh. And then at that point, what I'm really doing is I'm making sure I remember how I was thinking. Because later, you're going to get to that thing where like, oh, it was so good. It was the best time ever. And the problem with that is then you're like, you can't remember why you broke up. but there's almost always reasons. So I would say from that point, what you want to do is you want to take all the triggers, all the things that are going to fire off synapses, and where you get that sensation where you're like, oh God, it hurts, right? That sort of thing. Get rid of all that shit. Cut that out immediately. Don't have them on social media. Cut them out on every platform you possibly can. I know some of this sounds harsh, right? But realistically, some people are like, well, I'm friends with my exes. Well, that might be achievable much later. But I would say actually that that's a bit different. I feel that for guys, they struggle quite intensely with that. Girls seem to be able to do that like a lot better than men. I think it's just more of a the ability to put someone into like, okay, I see them as just a friend, or like, okay, now they're more attractive. Whereas for guys, it's a little bit different. I've typically found. I know I'm broad stroking, but at the same point, getting over the breakup, I would immediately get rid of all the triggers. Do all that, clean slate. If there's pictures and you're like, fuck, I was dating the person for like 5-6 years, go through all those pictures and untag yourself, delete them, all that stuff. And the reason you want to do this is part of it is in a certain sense ceremonial, right? It's kind of like, okay, I'm getting over this. I'm taking active effort to remove all the triggers. And then by doing that, you're going to really allow those synapses to kind of fade. And they're not going to trigger as easily, right? And so that's kind of the game plan, is you just do that. The other flip side to this is that I would make things more symbolic if you can. If you've been struggling with this for like a long time, like you just really can't get over that person, it's kind of in the back of your head. You find them, you find yourself looking them up on Facebook or creeping their Instagram, stuff like this. That kind of behavior has to go immediately. So I would put blocks in place. I would actually put like not allow me to go and view them. I would have to go into the settings, unblock them, and then do that. Like I'd make it harder for me to do that and to try and catch myself. Also, a huge thing is that be aware of like how you feel when you do that. You almost never feel better. And that's the trick to this, is that you recognize like when I look them up on Facebook later, I don't feel better. I feel much worse. Part of me is like, oh, I just want to see like what they're up to. I just want to see what they're doing. No, don't even entertain that. And part of it is having that awareness, right? Where you're like, every time I do this, do I feel like shit after? And go from there. Because if you're able to recognize that, like, I do this behavior, it doesn't make me feel good afterwards, then for next time, you're just like, this isn't going to make me feel better. I'm just appeasing an insecurity. I'm just appeasing that feeling of loneliness and stuff. So that would be my advice in terms of that, is get rid of all the synapses. Get rid of all the synapses like you go in or something. But realistically, don't allow them to trigger. You want to minimize the amount that they can trigger. The other thing you can do too is you can force them to trigger lots. So say, for example, there's a song that really like goes off and you hear that song, it's like, this was our song. I want you to like literally listen to that song on repeat and watch, like when you're out and about sort of thing. Listen to it over and over and over and over in new situations when you're partying with your friends or something. It might not be that kind of song, but you get my point. Is what you're trying to do is desensitize what that song means to you. And you do that by really just overexposure in a certain sense. That's one way to go about this as well. And I found typically for some people, it's a good rule of thumb that when you're getting over a relationship, people have different strategies. So one type of person, let's go ahead and for a kind of a simplicity's sake, say there's two different strategies. There's an easy strategy and a hard strategy. The easy strategy is very quick, you can apply it, but it doesn't fix the problem. The quality strategy is actually one where it requires a lot of like difficult emotions to handle. It's much harder, and it's typically permanent is what you'll feel. So here's my point, is that some people, when they get out of a relationship, they immediately go and jump into a new relationship. And what that is a desensitization strategy. That's what's easiest for them. They just go from relationship to relationship to relationship. And that sort of behavior is just how they've learned to adapt. Well, if you're the type of person that automatically does that, where you just jump into the next relationship immediately, you're just like, oh, that one's over, go to the next. If you're that type of person, then the easy solution to not feel pain is to go into a new relationship or get more validation or get back into the dating scene, that sort of thing. But you'll notice that the hard solution, the quality solution, is to actually be alone. To allow yourself, if you're that type of person, to be alone. Now, if it's vice versa, say for example, you're the type of person that when you get out of the relationship, you're like, I don't want to go out. I don't want to talk to people. I don't really want to talk about it. Like, and you just kind of isolate in. If that's your natural habit to do that sort of thing, I would from there recognize, okay, that's what you do to avoid the pain. You're like, I don't want to go out. I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling it. Then the quality solution, the harder one, is to go out and to get back out there sort of thing. I would look at it like this as well. So just know that there's the safe solution and the quality solution, and you select from those. So I hope that kind of answered your question. I could kind of rant on that forever. I'm going to try and answer as many questions as I can here. But again, guys, if you have questions, feel free to ask them, or you can even message me later too. Okay, from the other stream here. The difference between masculine and feminine success or personal development. So the difference between masculine and feminine success in personal development. When I'm referring to like masculine and feminine success, if you guys have like saw some of my other like content sort of things like that, I'm not sure what you're referring to fully on there. When I typically talk about masculine and feminine success for personal development, they have very different looks to them. So the one side that I would say is that you could typically find that when guys work on themselves, it's a different set of behavior versus when girls work on themselves. That kind of looks it looks different too. And the reason is that there's different values, right? So typically, broad strokes speaking, and I know I'm saying guys and girls here, but you can have, like, let's talk masculine qualities of development and feminine qualities of development. Ultimately, you want to work on both. But what those look like, typically speaking, is that masculine qualities of development are what's known as ascending traits. So they're things where you try and transcend problems, right? Make more money, get more physically fit, sort of thing, like build your strength up, transcend the issue if you can, right? Get an abundance of more people, get an abundance more ideas, like grow outward sort of thing. Whereas typically with feminine sort of success and personal development, it's descendant. So it's very focused on the sensory stuff. It's like getting present, getting aware of like your emotional state. It's becoming very attuned with yourself. It's becoming very vulnerable. It's learning how to really feel your emotions more fully. See, versus the masculine side is more like it's toughening up. And in life, you kind of want both of these things, right? There are certain times in life where you do want to, have less emotions, like you need to toughen up, you need to like buckle down and get hard. And then there's other times where you really do need to soften up. You really do need to, feel things more. It's like you're becoming too desensitized. You're becoming too like life doesn't have meaning in a certain sense. You need both, but typically speaking, you're going to find that, especially with like young people and stuff, you're going to find that a lot of guys or people that are more masculine in nature use transcendent style growth, and whereas people who are more feminine in nature use descendant present kind of work sort of thing, and the growth there. The other thing too is I would say that there's a huge, it's called agency versus community. Typically for masculine, they like to go towards things that make them more independent, things that make them more self-reliant, things that are more, let's say, easier to like not rely on other people. So you are an agent of yourself. Whereas you're going to find with more feminine-based development, it's more about bringing people together, community, really unifying things. And that's typically what I would say for the difference between the two. Let's jump back here to Facebook. Thanks so much, man. Good to know. Cool. Let's chill, work out soon. Definitely, man. Simon asks, what makes gold spurs so good? And second, what are some simple things I can do to stay on top of homework? Cool. Man, I don't know. No one knows what makes the gold spurs so good. Those are goddamn dangerous is what those are. I mean, even if you're an avid drinker, right, you have a couple gold spurs in you and you're done. So, I think I want to keep that one a mystery. I don't want to look into it. I have, but I didn't find much. And I've even asked the owner of the bar, and he's like, he won't tell anyone. So I'm like, okay, all right, we're going to leave it. We're going to leave it there, and I'm just going to keep drinking it, right? But some simple things I can do to stay on top of homework. In terms of like productivity, I would say don't schedule time. Schedule attention. So a lot of people say like, I'm going to book off, from 3 to 5 to work on my homework. Don't do that. Instead, what you want to do is schedule your attention. So for most people, what ends up happening is that when they try and stay on top of stuff, you have to remember is that in order for you to actually do homework, and typically speaking, homework is less fun than like Facebook and YouTube and stuff like this. When I say schedule your attention, what I'm really meaning is that you want to turn things off. You want to turn off your internet connection or turn off your notifications on your devices. Put your phone away. Really get used to actually like knowing that when you schedule attention instead, that's the time where you do deep work. When you schedule just basic time, you're like, I'm going to work from this time to this time. Every single time you get a notification on your phone, immediately your attention is brought somewhere else. And it actually takes a couple minutes to like swing back into it. Think of it like this, I'm trying to remember who the author is, but there's a book, it's called Deep Work. And essentially it talks about how your attention takes a while to go into deep work. And we're so used to like this immediate like, boom, Facebook here, boom, this thing here, like immediate notification. And the problem is like when we get a notification on our phone, it's almost always directed to us or it's relevant to us to some sense of it. And so you're like, a lot of it's like junk too, but it's just like when you look and you're, oh, me. And when you're doing deep work, you're actually focused on something separate of you. You're having to dive into someone else's theories or ideas and adapt them and learn them. So I would say schedule your attention. That's the first thing. Staying on top of homework. It's tricky too because some people are very, very inclined to stress, like using stress effectively. So that's like kind of the first thing I would say is that like for me personally, like I'm not the dude to stay on top of homework, but what I found is that I need the right amount of stress to actually get shit done. So I put myself in more stressful situations. So I do write my papers last minute, but it's because I'm already aware that I'm not going to write anything good if I spend a lot of time like prior and like slowly, like I'll work a little bit on it here, a little bit on it there, a little bit on it there. For some people that works. They can't handle that stress levels. It's about knowing yourself in that sense. And so just assess that like if you work really well with stress, go from there. And just understand, like, you don't beat yourself up like, oh shit, I got this thing, because realistically it's like staying on top of your homework is, it's like you might not actually be doing homework, but if you're thinking about like, shit, I got to get that done, like it's still on your mind and it's still bogging you down. So I would go ahead and say, like, from that point, just recognize, are you the type of person that, you work better under stress, and then adapt to that and just understand like, okay, I'll work on it at this time. And like a paper's going to take you 5 hours or whatever it takes you, right? And then you're just like, okay, from this time to this time, I'm going to schedule my attention, right? But again, if you're the type of person that you can't handle that sort of thing, it actually like fogs up your mind, then obviously you do it beforehand. But that's a kind of a basic answer to it. So hopefully that helps a little bit there. Let's go into, let's see. Frank, Q&A is looking good so far. Thanks, man. How do you make sure you're attracted to the actual person and not your idea of that person? Woo! Woo! Man, that's a deep one here. That's actually getting into like concept that I put in the fear called fantasy versus reality. And essentially, this is a big one because without me trying to explain the entire concept, because we'll be here forever, what it essentially is that people make assumptions about things that they have no idea about because they're projecting what they think that thing means. So let me give you a practical example so you guys can relate to this. When you, for example, someone likes an old post on, like, say, Instagram, right? It's like a couple weeks old, and you're like, oh my God, she liked it, and it was like 12:30 at night. She wants the D, right? Like whatever you say, and you make an assumption about that behavior. Well, the funny thing about that is it has nothing to do with that sort of thing. There are some people that literally just run through and they're like, tick, 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 and they just start liking all the stuff. They just start liking everyone's like photos and such. And the funny thing is, if that doesn't happen a lot to you, then you're going to make an assumption about what that means, right? And you're like, she liked the last 3 ones. She liked the last, couple posts and stuff. She must be interested. Some people do flirt with that, but here's another thing. It's very hard to read that sort of thing because it's so subjective. So even, a lot of guys will tell me, like, or even girls too, they're just like, I went in and I liked all of his posts, so he knows what's up. And it's like, no, realistically, he doesn't know what's up, because depending on how busy that person is, or depending on how often that kind of behavior happens to them, they don't even phase it. So like a lot of stuff too is like, you might have an individual who they get like 100 likes or something per photo, and they don't even notice like the difference because they're not going through and scanning. They're just like post a photo and they see the amount. So they're not even seeing you doing that kind of behavior. And because it's so common too, that's one of the things. So sorry, back to the question though. The question is, how do you know if you really like someone or you just like the idea of them? I believe that was the question. How do you make sure you're actually attracted to the actual person and not your idea of that person? So the thing that you actually need to do is have what I call reference experience. So you'll notice that in the very beginning of a relationship or in the very beginning of getting to know someone, you almost have like these intense feelings for them, but they're not grounded. So you're like, oh, this person's like the prettiest person, they're the nicest person, they're the kindest person. But what's really happening is that unless that's actually based in anything, if those emotions aren't based in actual evidence, they're just you projecting something on the person. And so here's like a really weird scenario is that what happens typically for a lot of guys is they do this. They really get kind of like welled up with emotion. They get a lot of like excitement about this and just like, you know, she's perfect, like she's the one I want, sort of thing like that. And then what ends up happening for girls is that the guy was like, he'll just go up and they haven't really talked or hung out much, and the guy will just go up and he's like, I love you so much, like I think you and me would be perfect together, and like, you know, I want to like let you know that I'm like, I have all these feelings for you. And the girl's like, holy shit, you don't even know me. Like, you don't even know me. And then what ends up happening is like, at that point is that most guys then go like, I should never talk about my emotions. I should never share that stuff. Girls hate that sort of thing. No. What girls hate is when you project an ideology onto them. That's the thing that like most girls hate. And this is something that affects a lot of guys, actually, I found. And so one of the things to get rid of this is just recognize where your emotions are based from, right? Constantly ask yourself, like, how do I know this to be true? How do I truly know this? Don't use social media to judge a person. Don't use anything other than your interaction. So there's a massive difference, and a lot of girls will attest to this too, where they'll go and, you know, a guy will be like, there's a big difference between a guy who's like, yeah, you're just like the prettiest person I know, like you're the kindest person, like you're so nice, and they're saying all this stuff, and the girl's like, oh, thank you, and she's trying to be polite, but realistically, she's just like, dude, you don't even know me. That type of compliment versus a guy who's just like, it's like, hey, you know, I saw you were volunteering and stuff for those kids or whatnot like that. That's pretty cool of you to do. Do you like doing that? Like, I thought it was kind of a stand-up. I saw you interacting, like you're really good with kids. Now, that's a genuine compliment. And the difference between there is when it's coming from a fantasy-based place, that compliment is projecting something onto the girl. So they're saying like, it's like, you're so nice, so you better behave so nice forever so that you can meet my idea of who I think you are. Versus the other compliment, which actually came from evidence and reference experience, is like, I saw you do something cool. I saw you do something really nice, and like that was cool of you to do. It's like you don't need to continue doing that. It's like I'm already praising you for stuff that I have evidence for. And the person might be like, oh yeah, no, it's really nothing, and that's a completely separate thing. But when you're looking at like, how do you know if you actually like the person or not? Really, just understand a bunch of different things. You're going to be affected based on your abundance levels in like the dating market. So if you were talking to like 5 or 6 different people, that's going to give you like a huge indication, because when people have like a lot of people they're talking to or dating at one time sort of thing, they actually get a very objective reality of what's going on, because they're able to like, they're not emotionally engaged because they've compartmentalized their attention. So what ends up happening, I'm not suggesting you can do that, but that's one of those things that like for a lot of girls, they're constantly getting hit up a lot, right? There's like tons of guys like, hey, like we should grab drinks or whatever. Hey, we want to hang out. This. Like that's happening all the time. So in a certain sense of it, for a lot of girls, they do get hit up quite a bit. And for guys, it's not as common. And so because that happens, guys usually get in their heads with this stuff, and then they start to project this thing. But you'll notice that like if you have like 5 or 6 people you were talking to, now obviously there's gonna be 1 or 2 that you like really like or something, right? But you'll just immediately know. Then you'll get kind of gauged to what's normal socially, and you can be like, okay, like no, like I'm attracted, and you can tell the difference between like I'm naturally attracted to that person versus when I'm I'm just like projecting things and making up stories in my head about who she is or what the situation is or how large our relationship is. Like if it's not based in evidence, if it's not based in like actual time spent and like actual things that have been said and like a vibe that you're feeling, and understand that you could be feeling something they can't. There's a lot to that. But that's my best advice, is that one of the things that cuts through that is to be socially inept. And that's why I typically find that like women are a lot more socially inept than most men are in today's day and age in the dating world. And what ends up happening is just because, girls are getting hit up more in the dating world than guys are, right? It's very rare for like a guy to get hit up or like some girl to message. Like I would even say, like even for myself, like barely. Like I think in my entire times of like, and you guys know how much I go to clubs and such, like in my entire times, I would say like maybe 7 times has a woman walked up to me and been like, oh hey, like what's up? Like that's about it. right? It doesn't happen, and I'm there all the time, right? So, but that's my point, is that the experience is very different. And so just recognize that, like, knowing what's up with like that sort of thing, having actual reference experience, and really criticizing how you know what you know, really just understanding the limitations to what you know. That's super important to be aware of. So like I said, that was a big question to try and get into, but let's see this. Ben Wild just shared your post. Oh, thank you, Ben. Let's see here as well. Oh man, we got a lot of people showing up. Cool. What's up, everyone? All right, let's. I'm gonna jump into the other stream here to answer some of their other questions. I'm nervous to talk to people at school. I feel it's just weird to go up to people and introduce yourself. How do I get over that? Okay, so depending on where you're at in your, like, let's call it like social anxiety or social inhibitions or even confidence levels, depending on where you're at, that's going to be a huge component to this. So for some people, it's just like, they just need to go and like have a couple of friends and like go do this once or twice, and then that fear just eradicates. For other people, it's way, way more intense. And so, I mean, this is kind of a pragmatic, simple answer to it, but you got to baby step it. Massively, massively baby step it, right? And it could be as simple as like just asking a question in class, like just raising your hand simply, like, or if that's even too much, then I would go and right from that point, I would go and let's say like just talk to your neighbor, right? Just like, and just make little comments here or there. It's like, oh, sorry, when was the test or something like that? Like, even if you know, even if you heard, just get in the habit of like, making those little comments. Or even if that's too much, then I wouldn't even do it at school. I would go out, and when you're like, even if you're just like buying groceries, or you're at like a restaurant or something, or you're just like at a drive-through, and someone's like, how's your day going? You could easily just turn around and just be like, my day's going pretty well. How's yours? And like just that little extra, and you kind of just baby step it, right? And then when that becomes irrelevant, then you up it a little bit more, up it a little bit more, up it a little bit more. Another thing too is to put yourself in environments that force you to be more social. So a huge, huge thing is to join drama, or to join some sort of like improv group, right? Do these sort of things, or you can join like a Toastmasters. Anything really that forces you to talk and to be sociable, put yourself in that environment. Most people have a hard time like with internal motivation, right? Like motivating themselves to actually go and push their boundaries. So instead, use, and it comes from a bit of a misunderstanding about emotion, right? Or sorry, about motivation. Motivation isn't necessarily something that you do to yourself. Rather, it's a reaction to an environment. And so it's the best way to kind of put this is that like, if you have a hard time running and like, hitting the gym and running and stuff like that, well, that wouldn't be an issue if you had like a bear chasing you, right? Like if a freaking wolf was chasing you, you'd be like, holy shit, and you just fucking run. You wouldn't think about it, right? Well, it's because an external kind of factor was motivating you. So put yourself in externally motivating factors. That's a huge thing too, right? Like join clubs, join like different groups. I mean, that's, for a lot of you guys know as well, like from here, not a lot of the students on the one stream I'm talking to here, but on my Facebook group, with all my Facebook friends, like they know, like I was part of like a lot in my community when I was at university, right? Like I went into like the whole SLC stuff, and a lot of that was because I have a natural inclination to have like more social anxiety. So it's like I forced myself into a environment which didn't allow for that. Like it just didn't allow for it. And then eventually I did that, and I did it for many years. And what ends up happening is that you actually build up kind of a muscle, if you will, of activating that. It's kind of, you're building up a synapse that you're making. And when you do this, you can activate it a lot quicker. And so for like now sort of thing, after having years of doing this, years of going out to nightclubs and talking to strangers and all these sort of things, now it's like, if I stop doing that, if I immediately just cut all people out sort of thing, I still will have that with me. I'll have a kind of a mental map that I can follow. And so what took me maybe like, let's say like 2-3 years of actively socializing before I felt like even like I could do it, now it's like if I ever have nervousness, I can get over it within like a couple of minutes of just pushing my boundaries a little. Like it's just like I go and talk to one person and I'm like, oh, okay. And then immediately it's like, and I kind of click back in and I'm back to being more social and non-anxious. So that's kind of a huge thing too. So you're nervous about talking to people at school. Feel like it's weird to just go up to people and introduce yourself. So how do you get over that? Yeah, like I said, baby step it. If it feels weird to you, honestly, it's more weird to kind of just be like alone and like just thinking and staring at someone and just like and like just thinking about like what you could, no, like honestly, if you don't make it into a big deal, if you just go up and make any sort of comment that works, even if it's just a compliment, like, yo, dude, that's like six, like those are some sick shoes or something, right? Do it like that. And you'll just notice that there's certain things that are more anxiety provoking than not. All right. Hopefully that answers it. Like I said, and if you want more on that, obviously that's kind of the entire program of it, right? Like I do have the fear product, right? So that's out on Udemy and such. So, and yeah, what I'll do as well, guys, is I'll put a link after this live stream too, so you can get the product for discounted price there, right? Because it's labeled at like $205 or something like that. So I'm doing a kind of like a launch pricing sort of thing, so you can have it for like $15, which is pretty sick. So yeah, so that's, I'll put the link for that. But anyways, let's see. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Like I said, I'm going to try and answer some of these other ones. I'm jumping back to Facebook here. Elton, good question. Oh, it's probably in regards to something else. Let's see. Benjamin Wild, what are some tips for dealing with rejection? What are some tips for dealing with rejection? So, rejection is a perceived notion. And what that means, I know it sounds pretty wordy, but the way I kind of view this is that when someone's rejecting you, how do you know they're rejecting you, right? How do you know that they're like, when they're saying no to you as a whole? Typically what I've found with people is that, say for example, they asked someone out on a date, right? And when they asked someone out on a date, they went and the person's like, oh yeah, no, sorry, I don't see it like that, right? You have no idea what's going on in their life. You don't know if their dog died. You don't know if they're like sort of seeing someone else. You don't know if like the situation is just not there. Like it's just, and again, it could just be the blatant out fact that, yeah, they're like not they don't find you physically attractive. And that's totally okay, because it's not supposed to be that way. You're not supposed to just be able to like walk up to every single person and have every single person like you. No, the joy is in the differences. You wouldn't want that to be the case if everyone was just like getting along, no problem. That would be extremely boring. And then on top of that, there wouldn't be any variety, and that would create a lot of boredom, right? So rejection is actually a very good thing for two reasons. One is that when you get more and more of it, it fine-tunes who you are. It actually makes you more confident in yourself. So for me, sort of thing, like a lot of people think that like I don't have any rejection. I don't get rejection often, right? Especially like in a dating world, for example, right? I probably get rejected more than the majority of people. I went through like tons and tons and tons of rejection, not just in a dating life, but in like in a business sense. I don't have a client that doesn't want to work with me, or they're just like, oh yeah, it's too pricey, or, it's like, I just don't think we're vibing. And I'm like, that's totally cool too. The point is not to have everyone like you. The point is to find people that, you interact well with, to almost find your tribe in a certain sense. You're not supposed to have everyone like you. You're not supposed to. It doesn't work that way. And anytime you put yourself out, you risk the judgment of that. And that's totally good. It's kind of the whole thing. It's like you could play it really safe in life and you're going to get the results that everyone else is getting, or you can stick your neck out. Even with the stuff I'm doing, it's very out there, right? Like for me to actually go and like produce content and like put these videos up, it's like, I don't know if many of you guys know other people really doing that, right? You might know other channels, but especially talking like about psychology and personal development, like it's kind of an odder thing, but it's who I am. It's what I love doing. And this is really what I'm used to doing. So there's a lot of people that like, they're like, oh yeah, that shit's weird, or that's like odd, or like, what is this thing he's doing? And honestly, it's like, okay, that's fine. Like you can totally have that opinion of it, right? I'm not looking to try and like, to have everyone like my stuff. That's not the goal. The goal is to help the people I can help or who are wanting help. That's it. And so other than that though, how you actually deal with it is recognizing that it's not you. It's just the situation. Or maybe, if the person's like, it is you, like, they're just like, it is you. I don't want anything to do with you, sort of thing like that, right? It's very much like that. Then that's totally cool. You're Xing them out off the bat. It wasn't going to work regardless. If we're talking about like relationships and stuff, I always use that like example. It's just easiest to relate to people with. With relationships and such, you shouldn't have to fight to have someone, want to like you. You shouldn't go for people that don't like you. And it's a kind of a weird thing in our minds where we go, just because they don't like me, it makes them higher valued, right? Because we kind of assume that things that are harder to get are higher value, and that's not the case at all. You should actually go for people that really like your content or really like what you're about, people that you're more compatible with. That's what's really important. So by you getting rejection, you're really just getting the people that are not relevant to your life, not going to be compatible to your life, out of the way. So see rejection differently. I would view it more in a sense of like, rejection allows you to find the people you're meant to find. And that's about it. And you're cutting through the bullshit. So hopefully that answers some questions here. And welcome. There's a bunch of different people on here as well. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot them down in the bar there. Let's go ahead. I'm going to jump to the other post here. When people say you have to love yourself before you love others, what does that mean? Okay. So when people say that you have to love yourself before you love others, what does that mean? So obviously a lot of people, we've heard this term, like you have to love yourself before you love others. What the hell does that mean? Well, everyone has their own definitions to it. I would say first start with understanding the difference between let's see what I can go into. I'll go into the theoretical side of it at least. There's a massive difference between love, romance, and attraction. Okay? You can love things. You can love people that you're not attracted to. You can love, a shirt. You can love a car. You can love a belief system. You can love, like your friends and such. And it doesn't mean you want to have romance with them. It doesn't mean you're not attracted to them. So to love really does just mean relating to things. It's you just seeing yourself in other things. So when you see something and you're like, man, that's kind of like me, or like you see, like a younger version of yourself in someone, or you see like yourself in, like where you're just like, oh, okay, yeah, like I relate to that person. That's what it really is. So when I hear the words like you got to love yourself before you, love others, what it really means is that you have to know yourself in a bit. You have to understand your likes. You have to know what your fears are. You have to know what what you will and won't tolerate in your life. These sort of things. So I would say like knowing yourself, knowing why you like what you like, these sort of things. And then having a healthy respect for yourself too, right? If you don't respect yourself, how on earth do you expect other people to? Right? And so on the one sense, like what does it mean to like love yourself? Well, I would say the very first thing is create higher personal standards for yourself. There's a huge thing about this, because what you want to hit this point where you're like, never fucking again. This is what I will and will not tolerate. That's kind of the very first step to self-love, where you're just like, these are the things I will and won't tolerate. And it's not about having like unrealistic standards. You actually start with yourself. I will not tolerate this type of emotion for myself. I will not tolerate this type of negative self-talk. And when you make that personal standard and you're just like, this is like what I will and won't tolerate in myself, then you're not going to tolerate from other people. And so you see how it starts with yourself first in that one sense, right? And in that same sense, if you have a good sense of yourself, you know yourself, then, like I said, it starts with yourself first, and then you can see yourself in other people. So really to like love someone else is to relate to them. Now, understand that that's very different than attraction and romance, right? Attraction is a completely separate thing. See, even if you look at like, you could have sex with someone you're attracted to, but you don't love them, right? You can, have romance with someone, and, it's like you feel this kind of like romantic connection to someone, but you don't love them. It's romantic, but you're just like, I don't love this person. But it's like you got swooned up with the whole like emotions of it, right? Like these things are very separate. And so I would say go from that place and just understanding the difference between them. And then when it talks about self-love, a lot of it is really realizing that you had no reason to not love yourself in the first place. I made a video on this as well, where the topic essentially was, I think, self-concepts, where it's like I can't really tell you how to love yourself. Like no one can, right? Like no matter how much shit you look up online, no one will be able to have you be like, oh yeah, like I should just love myself. It doesn't work that way. And the reason is that it's an experience. So no matter what I tell you right now, nothing I say is going to actually make any difference. And the reason is that it's something you have to realize. Now, what I can do is I can give you suggestions for behaviors you should start to adapt. And then if you adapt those behaviors, you're more likely to have that kind of realization, and where you're like, oh, I had no reason to not love myself, right? Like one of the things you can do, and what I talked about in that video, was you can actually go and you can start to be like more narcissistic. I know it sounds weird, but like you want to be a little bit narcissistic, like have a kind of, that's kind of where it starts. And you're doing it with a lighthearted gesture, right? Where you're just like, when you look at yourself in the mirror, you're just like, fuck yeah, you know? Obviously, when you're starting out, you're going to feel like a fucking idiot. You're going to be like looking in the mirror and just be like, why are you doing this? Like, you're like, Justin said to do this. And you're like, look at me, I'm so sexy. And you're like, you don't believe it, right? Eventually, if you continue doing that behavior, right, what ends up happening is that your brain doesn't understand the difference between what's real versus not. It's just taking data in. And so what ends up happening, your mind knows. Your mind will call you out on the shit, but your brain just sees reference points. So as you start feeding your brain with a more positive message, what ends up happening is that you start to see that positive message out in the world. So the best way to view it is that it's like if you have a friend who bought a new red Mini Cooper, you would then probably notice a bunch of other red Mini Coopers everywhere else. And it's not that those red Mini Coopers weren't there to begin with, it's just that your brain wasn't attuned to picking it up because it wasn't relevant. So when you make new things relevant, when you actually have like a really good self-talk, what ends up happening is that then you're like, you know, being more narcissistic, and it's kind of just, you have a fun with yourself sort of thing. As you do that, you're going to start to pick out that kind of data from the world. So you might be at a grocery store and you see someone, and then you're like, oh yeah, okay, they're checking me out or something, right? Whereas before you were like, what are they looking at? What are they thinking? So when you recognize that, what if you just did this process of like controlling your input and like correcting your self-talk, and then you started to see people doing that, then you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm hot. Your mind will know what you did. You'll know you just kind of bullshitted yourself. But that's important, because what you learn in that moment, what that enlightened kind of sense of it, or enlightenment, but like what that kind of like point that you're going to reach is like, all it was is that I just doing something to myself. All it was that I was just tricking how I'm perceiving things. And when you recognize that it's just something you're doing to yourself, you realize that it wasn't that you had a reason to not love yourself in the first place. So a lot of this is really just getting out of your own way. So that's one side to it. But like I said, I'm ranting on this. But in terms of that, that's kind of like, you know, just understanding that it's relating to other people, and it's, it's the relationship you have with yourself, and create higher personal standards for yourself. Look at what you will and won't tolerate. That's kind of stage one. Let's see here. I got some more people. Elton, what's up? Let's see. What are some tips for staying normal when talking to a hot girl or / someone I like? Kind of stupid, but when I hang with my friends, I talk in my normal mode. When there's someone I like, I feel like I go into a person who's not myself, but sometimes I am myself at the same time. By that I mean my vocal projection and other aspects. I have noticed that change. What are some tips that I can stay with my normal self instead of trying to come off and impress the person? Cool. All right. So yeah, obviously you can probably tell with most people that, like, say if you really like someone, you're going to act differently. There's a massive difference between talking to someone you're attracted to versus not, right? And what is that difference? That difference is when you're talking to someone you just see as like a friend, you're probably just like, hey, what's up? How are you? When you're talking to someone that you actually find attractive, you're probably like, hey, how's your day going? If you really think about these two people, the major thing that I notice immediately is tonality. Tonality gives us a huge indication as to what's going on within that person's internal state. And so the best way to put this is that there are 3 different tonalities, simply put. The first is known as trying for rapport. The second is known as neutral rapport. And lastly, the third one is known as breaking rapport. So these are 3 different vocal tonalities. So when you really like someone, or when you're trying to have rapport with someone, you're trying to get them to like you. So even think of like a professional setting, like you go into the bank or something. They're like, hi, welcome to the bank, how are you? Or when you're at work and you have to be like polite with customers and stuff, you're probably like, you're just like, hi, yeah, welcome to the store. Is there anything I can help you with? That's not your normal tone. you've actually increased your tonality. So it's like really high pitch. It's like, hi, how are you? Da, da, da. It's trying for rapport. And what that really demonstrates is like, you're up here and I'm down here and I'm trying to get your attention. I'm trying to get you to like me. And if I talk in kind of a more meek or high-pitched voice, hopefully you'll like me. Now, neutral rapport is how you talk to your friends, right? So when you're just like, hey, what's up, man? How are you? Like, oh yeah, that's cool. It's cool, right? It's like there's not that like high-pitched fluctuation. So that's how you talk with your friends, and that's how you talk with people you're comfortable with, like family and stuff like that. Then you have breaking rapport. Breaking rapport tonality is what you'd imagine like a police officer or a bouncer or like a president or a politician kind of talking. What breaking rapport essentially is it's like IDs now, right now. It's like, but it doesn't always have to be negative. It can be positive too. You're like, hey, what's up? How's your day going? Right? It can have a more like breaking tonality rapport. Now, typically when someone uses a breaking tonality, or breaking rapport tonality, they what ends up happening is that they're coming from a higher position and they're talking downwards. So it's like the bouncer at the club where he's like, I'm just doing my job here. And he's like, hey, none of that tomfoolery. He doesn't care about what kind of time you're having, if you're having a good or bad time. He's really just looking to keep people safe that night and just follow the law. And so his frame where he's coming from is like, I'm the rule here, and then you're going to follow the rule. And so the tonality that naturally comes out in that moment is a breaking rapport tonality. But a lot of people who are really confident or who know what they're talking about and stuff like that, you'll even notice with my own voice, is very breaking rapport a lot of the times. Because when I'm talking about stuff I know, or I'm like doing like videos, I'm like, hey, what's up? How are you? Justin's here, da 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 da. And essentially, it's not that I'm trying to like trick people, but it's the natural effect of when you're teaching something, you kind of go into a different tonality. So that's what I would say is understand that when you're interacting with someone you're attracted to, one of the things that changes is your vocal tonality. A lot of guys, and some girls too and stuff, go into this weird trying for rapport sort of thing where they're just like, hey, how was your day? Oh, that's good. That sounds cool. Da da da. Practice stepping away from that. Practice, like almost in a certain sense, force breaking rapport. And when you think you're breaking rapport, you're actually just going to come off as neutral. See, if you're naturally attuned to like to trying for rapport, like, hey, what's up? And now you're like, hey, what's up? How are you? Right? It's not like a fake, like kind of masculine sounding voice. It's not like that. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to hit that tonality where it's like da 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 versus this kind of thing. But even with you trying to do the breaking rapport tonality, you're then going to, you're actually probably just going to be in neutral. So it's like totally fine. And then you can practice these sort of things. But that would be my kind of first advice in that sense of it. So let's see if I answer that question correctly, go through here. I talk minimal, but there's someone I feel like I go into a person that's not myself. And again, there's another side to that is that, we oftentimes, when we really like someone, we see them in like the highest regard. And that kind of goes back to the other question that I answered earlier, which is that like seeing people for who they truly are. And the best way you can do that is with actual exposure, actual experience, right? One of the things that you can do, and I know for like a lot of guys sort of thing, it sounds odd to do, but let's give a prime example. So there's some guy that, he starts to really like a girl. So he starts to creep her on Instagram, creep her on Facebook and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, she's so pretty. Okay, she's a regular girl, a regular person, just as you're a regular person. I know I can't just say that. So what you got to do sometimes too is like really think of like who they might have been as a kid. Like think of like their nerdy years. Think of like when they had these awkward years when they're like a little like kid sort of thing, and they're just like, and imagine like people like in a certain sense making fun of them at school, right? You're just like, oh, you like that person? Ew, like this sort of thing. It's like you just have to start to relate where you're just like they're a normal person, like they went through these ups and downs like everyone else does. So that's one side to it. The other side to it as well is, like I said, is you're better off to just go and experience things and then from the experience get the emotion versus trying to like have the emotion and then have that emotion motivate you to take action, right? To like, okay, I feel this way, now I'm going to go and now I'm going to go and talk to her versus like you should just go talk to her. And then if you feel something, cool, go from there. That's probably the first kind of version of it, but great question. Let's jump in as well here. And yeah, I was planning on kind of doing this just for like the hour here, but I'll try and answer as many people's questions. If I don't get to all of them, my apologies, but I'll answer a couple more here. Ben with another question. Let's see, Ben. Are there any physical techniques you can do to boost your confidence? Physical techniques to boost your confidence. So like physical techniques, like one of the things too is that you can actually, when you think of what does a confident person look like when you think of someone who's confident, almost everyone is going to think of like someone who's like their chest is up, they're breathing fully. They have more of a stature that's like more relaxed and kind of like, they're looking up, their chin's up. Now, if I say, what does a depressed person look like? They're slouched down, their head's down kind of thing. Their breathing's very shallow. And, sorry, they kind of have this thing about them where they're like, they look depressed. A lot of this has to do with call it physiology. So one of the things physically that you can do is you can shift your physiology. So even when you're feeling depressed, even when you're feeling unconfident, shift your physiology. Get to a place where you're and you're walking around confidently. Start first with that. And you're not going to feel confidently, but what'll happen is as you do this, as you force a confident posture, you'll actually then start to have the emotions come up. See, this is kind of how it works, is that you have to do things physically first and then the emotions come second. So action first, then emotions. That's kind of a huge thing. Another thing physically you can do, when you say physical techniques, I'm not sure if you're just talking about behavioral things you can do or working out sort of thing, long-term stuff you can do. Obviously if you start to take pride in your appearance, you start to have a self-respect and you start to work on yourself in any forms, whether that be physically, whether that be enhancing, you're reading more and stuff like that. Any of things like that, that's obviously going to start to boost your confidence too. Physical techniques. So yeah, like I said, control your physiology first. Second thing too with physical techniques, I have always promoted cold showers massively, because what ends up happening when you do that is you're changing your state. So the goal is really just to hit a place where you're forcing a new state to happen. So when you get in the shower, instead of letting it go warm, you just go all the way fucking super cold. And what ends up happening is that it's just immediately you're bam, and you're just oh fuck, and you have that sensation, it's really, really cold. It shocks your entire system. And during it's miserable, right? But when you get out of the shower, then you're just and you're oh, that sucked. But you'll notice that your emotions are a lot better. Your state's improved. And when your state's improved, when you're happier, you're going to be more confident. So even when we think of someone who's confident, they're typically much happier. So those are, I guess, some physical things you can do. Yeah, that's pretty good. Good question. Let's see here. I got time for a little bit more here. Let's go. What's your stance on people who say they're waiting for the right time before taking action? Ooh, man, Frank coming in with the hot questions. Okay, so a lot of people have this sort of thing where they're hey, what's up, Ira? A lot of people have this thing where they're I'm waiting for the right person, or I'm waiting for the right time. When's the right time? Again, this falls into you don't have any idea what the right time is. Not even close to what the right time is. So you might as well find out what the right time is by going after it anyways. The point that I'm going to more make is that when we think of waiting for the right time, there's a right time for yourself in the sense of you can make a self-assessment of this is not what I need to be focused on right now. I shouldn't be focused on a relationship right now. I should be focused on my career. That's a priorities thing. So that's kind of on a different topic, but my stance on when people say they're waiting for the right time before taking action. So the one thing from my experiences doing boot camps and stuff, when I deal with some guys and I'm okay, let's go and start talking to people, right? Let's go talk to some strangers, and they see a girl on her phone at the club or something, right? And I'm okay, go and talk to her. And he's no, she's on her phone. Well, okay. It's not that you're going to wait till she gets off her phone. Do you know what I mean? You could walk up and if she's having a conversation, then obviously you have social acuity with that. But more so, just think you might be, waiting, at the bank, waiting in a lineup or something, right? Waiting to grab food. And what do? You pull your phone out. It's just kind of a normal behavior. So my point is that we have no idea what the person's experiencing. We would be more than open to actually having a conversation with someone cool. It's just that like, just so we're not standing there awkwardly like, ooh, like looking around sort of thing, we pull out our phones. And so that's one of the examples is where someone made a like placed a certain meaning to like when's the right or appropriate time, when in reality they actually had no idea what the appropriate time was. So if that, hopefully that answers your question on that sense. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. Before taking action, like I have a saying where I'm like, quit waiting, start dating, right? Like just stop waiting for the right person to come into your life, because it's not going to happen. See, this is actually gets pretty controversial, because there's this notion that like, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Fuck that. No. What you're really doing at that point is you're putting, if you're a single person, and why this is controversial is because when I point this out, a lot of people are actually going to fight me on this. They're going to be like, no, that's not how it was with my experience. But that has to do more with like what I'm going to call ego protection, where you're trying to rationalize and justify your own behavior. So it's like when I say this next thing, if you relate to it and you're in a relationship, it's not that I'm meaning this in a bad way. I could be wrong. Like I said, there's always exceptions, but I'm broad stroking again here. So with that understanding, when I say don't wait, start dating sort of thing, just recognize that part of this is a bit of a numbers game. Part of this is actually it's kind of a luck of the draw. When people get together, a huge component is where they're both at. So the best way for me to kind of define this is that it has to do with like, I'm trying to like not get too much into the theoretical side of this, but think like this. When people decide to start dating, it often has to do with the fact that they're both sick of dating. They're both sick of the game of dating or the marketplace. They're like, I just want to buckle down and get something serious. So it's actually, I'm going to call it this. It's not necessarily this, but I've always kind of called it insecurity levels. So it's like when people's insecurity levels or personal standards match up, then that's when they're like, okay, I'm ready to date. Right? So it's like, imagine like you meet someone and, you know, they're just like, yeah, this whole dating thing is like dumb. Like, I just kind of want to like settle down. You're like, yeah, like I hate this dating stuff too. Like, it's crazy. Like, you hate it too. And you're like, yeah. And you guys stop both pretending that you're too cool. And then it's like your insecurity levels, and everyone has insecurities, but those insecurity levels match, and you're like, okay, yeah, boom, and they settle down. They immediately just go into a relationship. That is huge on timing, because some people, they get into the dating market and then they're like, they're dating and they go on some dates here and there and they're talking to some people and, you know, and they're having fun with it, right? They're just like, they're not really serious. Whereas someone else is like, actually, they're at their wits' end. They're like, I'm tired of this shit, right? And they're just like, I just want to get into a relationship, right? Or I just want to be done with this dating stuff. When the people hit that place, then it's like you have these two people cross paths and it's like, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen because the timing isn't right. So a lot of this has to do with like a numbers game. It has to do with the fact that like you're looking for combinations of people. So before you get like really overwhelmed with emotion, it's important to have a good, clear understanding of like what you want, where you're going and like looking for, so that you can then filter people accordingly. Because if you're just going with what you get, like realistically, it's not as romantic, is it? And there's something that's kind of like, it's like, what sounds more romantic to someone? I'm with you because I had a selection of people and you were the person. Like, it's like, you know, like I've dated a lot of people. I know exactly what I want. You are exactly what I want. You know, it's just like, yeah, I have choice. You know, it's like, yeah, I could date anyone I wanted, or I have a couple people, but like, no, you're the person. I want to settle down with you. That is way more romantic than like, oh, you know, we worked together and it was just the only person in the environment, so we just decided to date. And a lot of times what ends up happening is that when there isn't the abundance there, what happens is that people will just like settle. They'll kind of, and it's not settling because what's happening to the individuals, they have tons of emotion. They have tons of like dopamine and serotonin and stuff running through their system. So they're blind. They see this person in like this, like rose-colored glasses, and they're blind to the incompatibility parts. So then what ends up happening is that as they start dating, as they start having conversations, as they start like maybe getting into a couple fights, and they realize like, yeah, you know, maybe this person isn't this like great person I once thought they were. And you're starting to see the reality of what it is. And this is, again, that fantasy versus reality concept, right? And that's what I'm saying. It goes in quite in depth there, but that's kind of like, that's a huge thing. So hold on one second. I'm going to answer a couple more questions here, guys. Thank you for your questions, by the way. Let's see here. Are people really meant / built to be monogamous? If so, Why do we still have attraction / desire towards other people? Man, fantastic question. Okay, so topic on monogamy. So obviously there is when we look at, I'm talking primal Paleolithic era kind of stuff, like when we look at our caveman times, obviously you can start to see certain trends where, guys are not typically as monogamously like tuned as females are and such. You can see that sort of thing. So that's part one. Part two sort of thing is recognizing that there's a massive difference between when you feel attraction versus when you're in a relationship. See, it really depends on the person, but I would go ahead and say, first rule of thumb, you do whatever you want to do. Whatever lifestyle works best for you, just do that. Like, don't worry about anything outside. If you don't want to be monogamous, don't be monogamous. If you do, cool. Understand what monogamy is to you, though. So when we think, are people naturally, like, you're looking for like a broad stroke answer in one sense, I would say, animalistically, no. I would say socially, culturally, yes. Monogamy is actually a good thing too, because it allows you to really focus on other things in life. See, for a lot of guys, when they're like single and stuff and they really are enjoying the single life, and even for myself too, it's like when I'm like really in the dating field, I'm like really liking it and I'm like looking for, like a partner sort of stuff, what's happening is I'm all over the place. I'm just having fun and I'm scattered. It's very tough for me to focus on work. So in one sense, when I'm like monogamous or when I'm like not dating, I'm able to focus on other areas of life. So monogamy is freedom in one sense of it. And in another sense, obviously it's not. So when people think like, let's see, like, are people naturally monogamous? Well, like I said, it's naturally speaking, like primally, like evolutionarily speaking, not necessarily. I mean, it really depends. Like if you take like a Richard Dawkins approach to evolution, like a selfish gene concept, you're going to say like, maybe not, but like if you apply like altruism, like, and that's getting into a completely separate thing. Or if you look at like the any sex, there's a book that's called Any Sex Concept of Evolution. They're going to say that like, yes, people naturally are, right? So, I mean, there's lots of different takes on it. Like I said, mine is really just that like primally, no, but we don't operate primally. Do you know what I mean? We're not running around like just like beating people with clubs and stuff, right? Like we're not as animalistic. Like we can be very much like we understand. Obviously don't, you don't just go and like fight people and shit. Like socially we're cultured, and that's kind of the whole thing is once you become civilized, then being civilized is like, okay, yeah, part of it is monogamy too. So hopefully that answers that question, but if so, why do we still have attraction / desire for other people? Okay, so this one I'll try and answer it quickly here, but one of the things that ends up happening, especially when we talk about like desire and attraction, is that you will almost always have attraction to people that give you the opposite, let's call it, I hate using this term, but we'll use the term for now, is you're going to always be attracted to people who have the opposite energy as you. And what I mean by that is that masculine energy and feminine energy sort of thing are always going to have a polarity. Always. And you're going to come across this all day long. You're always going to, and we have both in us. We have both masculine qualities and we have both feminine qualities in us. And when you're in a more feminine mood, right, and you're feeling more free, more in tune with your emotions, you're feeling more like you're able to, like you're just at the flow of things, you're going to be attracted to masculine energy. And when you're in a more masculine mood sort of thing, or when guys or even girls who are more attuned to a masculine nature come across someone that is of like a feminine nature, automatically they're going to have attraction. So when you understand that this polarity is pretty natural and it happens throughout your day, it happens all the time, you don't take it so hard. Like it's very separate from love. It's very separate from, romance. So earlier in this live stream, I talked about like the difference between love, romance, and attraction. It's okay to have the attraction. It's very separate than the love. It's very separate than the romance, right? And so understand that, yeah, you can be attracted and have desire for other people, so that's totally normal. It can be an innocent thing if you see it as just this polarity. The other thing too is that, some people, they can't control like the fantasy stuff that we've talked about earlier, where it's like they really start fantasizing a lot about a certain person. So say they're in a monogamous relationship and they're just like, they're thinking about this other person and they're just like, oh shit, yeah, like, and they can't help it. They're just like, oh shit. Or maybe it's a little flirtation at work or something like that, right? Whatever it is, they're fantasizing. One of the ways you break down the fantasy is by verbalizing it to the person. So it's like that will kill it immediately. And I know it's hard, and it's kind of like, what the fuck? But there's actually a book, it's called Radical Honesty. It really talks heavily into this, where it's like, yeah, we're going to have these attractions to other people. But one of the things they suggest in this book is that, and take it for what, for its face value here, but one of the things is that they say, if you find yourself attracted to other people outside of your relationship, tell your significant other. Like, tell them, like, yeah, like, I'm telling you this because I'm trying to, I'm just trying to get rid of it in my head. And I know that by telling you this will remove it. And it's going to hurt the person, right? But you're doing it with the intention, and they know the context as well. You're doing it with the intention of eradicating that fantasy. And trust me, when you go ahead and you're like, yeah, like, I don't know what it is, like this person at work, like, I just have this like stupid thought, and I was like attracted to the person. And I wanted to tell you because I know that by telling you, it's going to, it's going to relieve it from my mind. And that's it. And now that I've said it, I feel much better. And it's going to hurt. It's going to suck to hear that shit, right? But that's going to fucking kill it immediately. Because what you're doing in a certain sense is you're conditioning yourself not to fantasize, right? And that's super important too if the fantasization element is an issue. So, let's see here. I'm going to try and answer. I got a couple questions coming in from the other live feed, and then I have the Facebook one here. So, let's see. I'll go back to the Facebook. Oh, Benjamin Wild again. Let's see. Do you have any recommendations for the reading on confidence social techniques? Oh, yeah. The Fear. It's by a great author, Justin Quinton. No, really, I actually, if you want to improve confidence and social techniques and stuff, definitely do check out my product. Like I said, I'm going to put out a code so you can get it for $15. So it's like cheaper than a book, and it's like a video series, and I'll actually break down step by step how to do that. So that's like huge. The other thing outside of myself, any advice on or further reading on confidence social techniques? In terms of like social techniques, if you start studying like any sort of communication, if you start studying personality, for example, that's a huge one, because when you recognize that like, people are, we communicate differently, that's huge. You can start to accustomate, like that's social technique stuff. So, if you start to look up like Myers-Briggs typology and stuff, and like regardless of like how accurate or not it is, just looking up into it gives you a bit of a framework to, be more accurate and more effective in your communication. You can start to look up in terms of like confidence-wise. There's so much out there. There's, you can kind of look into like NLP stuff as well. The list is really endless. It's a topic that a lot of people have opinions on. There are many different approaches to it. I've always found that confidence was the byproduct of not having anxiety. So it was like you actually work on the anxiety first. You actually rip the roots out from the ground, and then the byproduct of not having anxiety was being charismatic and having confidence. Rather than trying to fake the confidence and then hope that the anxiety goes away, you got to go about it the other way. So even if you look towards like how to remove social inhibitions and stuff like that, that's huge too. Let's see. Got Simon. Another question from Simon. How do you compliment a feminist on their physique without them getting mad that you are seeing them as an object? Holy shit. Well, I'm assuming that like when you're saying that, like, I mean, obviously, like, what does it mean to be a feminist, right? Like, everyone has, like, the definition changes all the time, right? Like, you have first and second and third and fourth wave and stuff like this, and people identify with things differently. Obviously, if, like, one side of it is, like, if you're asking, like, you're thinking of maybe, like, some crazy angry feminist or something, and you're, like, you try to compliment them on their physique without, like, goodness, like, certain things like that, I probably wouldn't, you know what I mean? Or I'd be like, I probably would, to be honest. I'd just be like, oh yeah, like if I said something like, oh yeah, you're looking nice, like, I wouldn't think too much into it like that, right? But yeah, I mean, if someone's just like, like a regular person that like, believes in equality, they shouldn't really have a problem with someone just like complimenting them, as long as the compliment's like genuine, right? Like there's a huge difference in the approach that you take. So like for some guys, they'll just go and be like, it's like, yo man, thicker than a bowl of oatmeal, that ass. Like they'll say some sort of thing like that. It's funny, but it's more in the sense of like, the girl's like, what does she have to work with that? Like, she's like, what the fuck, right? Versus if you were like actually detail oriented. So you were like, you went and you're just like, oh, I like how, your purse matches your shoes and things like that. A lot of attention to detail. Like, I like that. It's cool. Very fashionable. That's a very different type of compliment, right? So, I mean, you just realize with like that we are all kind of looking for different things in that sense of it. Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question too. It is a loaded one. Let's see. All right. Hold on, guys. Let me jump in. For context, yes, they are, but I'd be fine just trying to slam. Fight as hell. Oh man. So, okay, fair, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna take like 2 more questions here, and that's it. All right. Let's see. So, all right, it's blown up on all these different areas here, so I'm gonna try and answer everyone's questions. My apologies. Like I said, I'll see if I'll start answering them quicker. Okay. Do I believe in non-negotiables in a relationship? If so, what? So do I believe in non-negotiables, like absolute rules? No. I don't believe in absolute rules with relationships, but with individuals, yes. So, like, in terms of relationships, honestly, when there's like social normals or social rules, yeah, no, fuck that. Because realistically, it's between you and the other person. Your normals or your non-negotiables or things, it's based on what both people are comfortable with, what they want to do. It shouldn't have to do with like a broad stroke, like anything society-based or anything like, society says we have to get married. Society says we have to do this. No, absolutely not. I mean, I know that's a rule in one sense, but it's like, realistically, if you are happy, if it works, cool. Stick to that. And that's kind of my advice on that. It's just like, no one can judge you for you being happy and you being like, satisfied and fulfilled in what you're doing. So with individuals though, like non-negotiables, in a certain sense, you have a relationship with yourself and you should have non-negotiables. I personally do not tolerate within myself negative emotion that is not productive. So I am very much like, I won't victimize myself. I don't think I ever, and I mean, catch me, call me out on this if you ever see it, but realistically, like, I do not victimize myself. I don't allow for that type of mentality in my head. So I'm never like, oh, poor me, or like, oh, I can't do this because of this or this. Like, no way. I don't tolerate that. And that's a personal non-negotiable that I have with myself. And I hold myself to that high standard because that allows me to, to really, put pressure on me that no one else is going to do. And I already recognize the value of that. So that's a personal non-negotiable I have with my own self, like the relationship I have with myself. But your non-negotiables in relationships, it really should just be the extension of your own personal thing. So like, if you have a rule that's just like, like some people have rules where they're just like, listen, I don't want you having friends of the, of the opposite sex or something, right? And society might say like, oh yeah, like that's being insecure, or whatever like that. But if you're basing that rule off of like your personal standards, you're just like, maybe you have like a girl or whatever and like one side is like, oh, that's insecure. But again, that's a judgment. One side is very much like, if you've been in a relationships like a ton and you've always found that, like it's just whenever like these, he's always friends with his ex still, and like that's always caused a problem in all my past relationships. One side of it is like, yeah, you shouldn't be carrying any of the past stuff. But if it's a real big thing for you, it's your personal rule, then you uphold that up front, and you're very honest. You don't throw that in midway through the relationship. You actually own that, and you're okay with the fact like, yo, this is like my personal standard, and you own that. And you'll find that like a lot of people agree with it and some people don't. And if it's that important to you that you want to have a non-negotiable, then then the relationship ends. And you're just like, okay, like if that's not going to work, then no. And some people are going to see it as insecure, some people won't. But again, like I said, make your own judgments. Whatever works best for you. If you're happy, if these are things that work, like that's cool. Because it really is, like in terms of relationships and stuff, the best way that I've kind of seen it is it's very much on a spectrum of like absolute radical openness and then absolute like we don't talk about these certain topics, right? Like super suppressed and then radical openness. And it's not that there's like a better or right way. The super radical openness is like you would be like very much like, yeah, like I found this person attractive at my work. I'm gonna fuck them tonight. And they're like, oh, thank you for telling me. Have a good time. And you're like, holy shit, like that's way too open for me, right? On the other side, it's like you were looking at that person. Are you attracted to that person? Like, of course I'm not attracted to you. I'm only attracted to you. Or, it's like, well, I'm not attracted to that person. Like, there's just like stuff we don't talk about. Like, we don't talk about our past, and it's like very suppressed. So obviously there's two extremes, and then most relationships live within that spectrum, and you just find where you're comfortable. Some people don't want to be in that crazy open range. Some people want to be more in the more polite, kind of like proper range. It's totally dependent on the person. So you find another individual that matches that value, and you settle down with them in that place, and then you operate within those rules. And those rules are always like, on the open side, it's like radical honesty, radical trust. This is what this is the rules of our relationship, the non-negotiables in a certain sense. And then on the other side, it's like, we don't talk about this, we don't talk about that, we don't do this. And each has positives and negatives, and like I said, you just pick what works best for you, where you're most comfortable. You'll find you have a threshold somewhere, and then that threshold is very much like what you should be doing. But don't let society kind of push you in terms of like what you should or should not do. That's silly. It's between you and the other person. Yeah. So yeah, guys. I mean, that's it's been about an hour and a half here. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for watching and such. Yeah, we should do this more often. Pretty good, great questions. This stuff. I'm sorry if I couldn't answer all of them here, guys. Like I said, I was getting like tons on different feeds. But yeah, like I said, I got my new product coming out too. It is already out. It's right on Udemy. I'm gonna post a link to it on my Facebook page, so feel to check it out. It's pretty good. It's pretty sick in terms of confidence, social anxiety, stuff like that. It's all around just like a really cool ass product for personal development, right? Self growth and things like that. It affects everything from your relationships to even your professional life and work and stuff like that, like being able to go and like ask for the raise, stuff like this. So that's called the Fear 2.0. That's the plug for that. But you guys, thank you so much for your questions. Yeah, it's been awesome. So hope everyone's doing well, and I shall talk to you guys later.